never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Pitt.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stones.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live here on YouTube. It's Mock Draft Monday, Sam. Mm-hmm. You ready to go?
Yes.
It's
early.
Full
Monday.
off season. Official. First full week of the off season. Our favorite time of the year, the real season.
We're working our way slowly to 9 a.m. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
But we're heading that way.
We have a hard out. We have a meeting.
Right.
Get this meeting coming up, so we're going to, we'll be at 9 a.m. maybe next week. Maybe we also might be live.
Yeah, because we're going to potentially pre-record next
live
week.
to tape Sunday night because it's Combine week.
So next week will be 9 a.m. We won't be there, but
presumably. So, PFF NFL podcast. We're going 5 days a week. I thought we had a good, fun week last week. We had Renner and Trevor fill in for us on Thursday with a great show talking about Renner's most recent mock draft. And Friday, great interview or discussion with Rick Spielman. I'm not saying it was a great interview. Still got some work to do on my interview skills over here.
We're all growing.
We're all looking to get better. But we had a fun discussion with Rick Spielman.
Rick's out there trying to get better at the whole TV thing, CBS. You and I are trying to get better at being interviewers and journalism, despite actually me having a degree in that. We're all trying to get better. Yeah. That's what we're doing here.
Trying to lead them. Trying to lead them down the right path. But anyway, I came into the Rick Spielman interview genuinely inquisitive about their process, right? Draft process, free agent process. If any deals were made at Prime 47 in the wee hours of the morning in Indianapolis. And we got a different answer. Yeah. Where the deals are made.
More of a steak and shake guy.
Steak and shake or the Hertz rental. The Hertz rental bus or whatever on the way to the Hertz rental car. So anyway, go check out that interview from Friday. Today, though, we're starting Mock Draft Monday, which means every Monday you tune in, we'll either have our own original mock draft, or we'll do one live, or we'll review someone else's. But I think the key here is you get to hear us discuss the first round over and over and over again, because that's the fun part, is discussing process.
Who doesn't want that? We started with the Godfather, Mel Kiper, the Do. I guess if there's anybody that rivals him, it's got to be Todd McShay, right? So that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah, we're going to go to Todd McShay and break down his most recent mock draft. It's over at ESPN.com. It is part of your ESPN Plus package, but we'll go pick by pick. And I'm glad that he did start with a trade, because it makes it at least a little bit more realistic at the top of the draft.
Well, it's always the thing that I want to hear from every mock draft at this point is, okay, tell me your starting assumption with the number one pick. Is Chicago staying there? Are they trading out? Are they probably trading out, but you're just not doing trades in this draft? Like, tell me what your process is to get to this stage.
I think the McShay's and Kipers of the world usually try to avoid trades.
Yeah.
But this year, because the Bears are sitting there at 1, nobody wants to screw up their entire mock and just say, give him Jalen Carter, give him Will Anderson, even though we know it's not going to happen. So, you ready to get into the whole thing?
Yes.
All right. Todd does go with a trade at the top. It's the Indianapolis Colts trading up with the Chicago Bears to number 1 to take Alabama QB Bryce Young.
So what's fun is McShay was also on TV last week saying that the Bears should trade Justin Fields, not trade the number 1 pick.
This is way more common of a take than I thought.
Right.
People assumed it was
exactly my
the
point.
Nerds. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your point. See,
No. That was
getting better.
That's exactly what it was. Like, I'm surprised how many people currently have that take. Todd McShay was on TV with it. Mike Tannenbaum, your buddy, has been making that point basically all the way along. That is starting to become really quite a common take, which I did not expect amongst the quote-unquote football people.
It's making me rethink things. If it's the right
I mean,
take.
it's not. I don't think it's changing my opinion one way or the other. But I am surprised how many people appear to have it right now.
Yeah, I think the assumption was that it was just going to be the analytics nerds that were pushing this thing, right? Get to the next quarterback, get to the next quarterback. The other point was, and when I was on the Dan Patrick show last week, and
wow,
Dan,
what a name drop! I was just on the Dan Patrick show last week.
I'm just spitting facts here.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan, if you want to learn some interviewing skills, Dan did a good job.
It's a man that's been doing it for a while.
Because he's asking, what would you do at the top? And I was like, if you're the Bears and you have to consider these. He goes, no. What would you do?
He
said,
you a
what
question.
would you do?
You tried to sit on the fence and not give him an answer, and he wasn't taking it.
If you're the Bears, you got to consider both sides. He goes, no, Steve. Mm-hmm. What would you do? So now I have to declare I would
on the Dan Patrick show.
On the Dan Patrick show.
What did you
say? So that they could tweet it out.
Right.
And then I have Bears fans telling me how stupid I am.
So you said trade Fields.
I said trade Fields.
You said trade Fields.
Yeah. Now, one of the other points that was brought up, this is where the analytics people might have a slightly different take. It's actually don't trade Fields. It's actually just bring them both in the building because they don't care about human nature.
That's
right?
what your take should be.
That's not my no.
But it's what it should be. That if you're being consistent, that is the most Steve take out there. Is get them both. Get both quarterbacks. Who cares about feelings?
Like Troy Aikman, Steve
just
Walsh.
Shove them together and figure out who's going to succeed. That should be the Steve take.
The only thing that would make me not want to trade Fields is as crazy as fun crazy Dan Orlovsky is sometimes with his takes. Mm-hmm. When he said Justin Fields is the MVP of the season or something like that. He said something like that midseason after like 2 games. There's parts of Fields' play that looks like it could be MVP caliber. And I know this is a big if he gets better as a passer. But we've seen him throw the ball extremely well at a point in his career. It happened in Ohio State. But we've seen Justin Fields. He's got all the skills as a passer. He just hasn't really translated it to the NFL. But he hasn't had the opportunity either. Hasn't had the offensive line. Hasn't had the playmakers. And he's a dynamic runner. That's the only thing that would make me say, maybe I should stick with Fields and build around him, trade the number 1 pick, so it's Fields plus all of those picks. That's the one thing that makes me say, okay, even with only 2 years left on the rookie contract, or 3 years left, man, we could do something here with Fields if he develops.
When I saw the McShay take that they should trade Fields, I tweeted out that I was surprised how many people have this take, and I made a point of saying I am not commenting on the take either way in this tweet, simply surprised at how many people have it. The number of people that were replying well, what's your take?
I would like to
make
know.
a declaration.
Have you gone on record yet?
Yeah.
Is that a Salt Lake Bees jersey?
No.
By the way?
No, it's very much not. This is a Wasps rugby jersey.
The Wasps?
Yeah. London Wasps, who then moved to Coventry and then died financially.
Interesting.
So it's a little tribute to the Wasps.
Looks like the Salt Lake Bees. Pacific Coast
it's
League.
not. So I did. I declared. I've already said it, I think, a couple of times, but I declared officially in the tweet, under that tweet, and said my take is that they should keep Fields. I don't think Bryce Young is obviously that much better a prospect. I think his tape is better than college Justin Fields. On the other hand, he's 5'10", 175. So that scares me. I don't know how much it scares me, but it scares me enough that I'm not Kyler Murray, Josh Rosening this thing. I'm not he's so much better than Fields. It's a no-brainer. He isn't. He might be better, and I think his tape is better. It's like Rick Spielman said. If he was 6'2", 220, it would be I think I would move. But he isn't. He's 5'10", maybe 180. And that it's just enough that I'm scared enough by it that I'm going to lean with Fields and say, all right, he did enough last year that I want to see what he can do with everything put around him.
There were statements like that made about Russell Wilson when he came out back in 2012. If he's 6'2" instead of 5'10", he's the number 1 overall pick.
And by the way, Russell Wilson is probably going to outweigh Bryce Young by 30-plus pounds.
Oh, yeah, he's got thick.
That's the thing. It's
thick.
It's the composite of short and tiny, which shouldn't make a difference, but just because it's unprecedented, it should. It's like Devontae Smith, right? We know that being a small wide receiver doesn't really matter in the greater scheme of things, but if you're going to show up with a number like 166, it's so extreme that you have to at least think, I mean, does that make a little bit of a difference? Because, I mean, even just on the same team, right? The difference between Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, like that 50 pounds or whatever the hell that is, it does make a difference. The question is how much?
All right, so let's get into this from a Colts perspective. So the Bears have traded out, and they've traded back to number 4. I don't know if did he even detail the actual trade?
No.
I don't think he got into the Jimmy Johnson chart and let you know. But we'll assume the Bears get a pretty good haul here, including the number 4 overall pick. So the Colts are the team to move up to number 1. Mm-hmm. Are they the most likely team to come to number 1? The other candidates are the Texans at 2, maybe the Panthers at 9, the Raiders at 7.
Actually, he did ballpark the trade.
He did ballpark.
Number 4, a second rounder, a 5th rounder, and maybe an additional first next year.
Oh, wow. That's
quite a big maybe. I mean,
yeah, it feels like
it's quite a large
like
part of that.
So are the Colts the most likely team?
Yes.
I agree. I think they are the most likely team to move up to number 1. And is Bryce Young the guy that, let's be serious here, is this Chris Ballard's pick or is this Jim Irsay's pick? Who's the guy most likely to tickle Jim Irsay's fancy?
It's funny because the concern that you have, or that I have, Bryce Young's size, it's kind of like it's like the Mac Jones thing when the 49ers are trading up, right? If you're going to trade up, the extra capital that you're giving up, the sort of the downside, I think scares you more. So I could see Mac at the time. I could see Mac Jones being plugged into that 49ers offense and doing an amazing job. But it's like, but is it worth 3 first-round picks? No, not really. So now you're like, all right, I think Bryce Young is the best quarterback in this draft. I think he has clearly the best tape of any of these quarterbacks. So therefore, he's the best quarterback. But I'm pretty comfortable making that declaration just at number 1 overall, period, the end, move on. But now you say, okay, but what if it costs you an extra second rounder, a first rounder next year, and a 5th round pick this year? Are you still that confident? Well, now I'm like, God, but he is really small. You know what I mean? It just scares me even more the more you sort of roll into the deal and have to gamble on it.
Why should we be concerned about height, right? Because even Rick mentioned durability. I think even though we've poo-pooed the durability thing before, mm-hmm. right, that it's not just about 6'5", 230 equals durable, there is something to it, right?
Well, so
is it just the fact that we haven't seen it?
Yeah, the biggest fear is it's unprecedented. Now, where I think Young is different is, so number 1, we've talked before about size is not necessarily a durability thing. It's a play style thing, right? Like if he protects himself, it doesn't really matter that he's small. He does protect himself. So I think he's better at avoiding hits than a lot of quarterbacks. Therefore, I'm not massively concerned by that. Now, Tua this year showed the potential flip side of that, which is, all right, even if he protects himself, at some point, a guy that weighs 330 pounds is going to get their hands on him and simply throw him to the ground like a sack of potatoes. And when that happens, when you're outweighed by that much, you simply are no longer in control over what happens to your body once it flies into the turf. You know what I mean? And Tua probably outweighs Bryce Young by 20 pounds, you know?
And we talked to him a lot the first 2 years, how small Tua felt.
Right. So again, we're talking like just unprecedented size problems. The second issue is the height thing, which is, look, quarterbacks that are that short have restrictions that taller quarterbacks simply don't have. Now, it's not as simple as you can't see through the pocket when you're that size, because nobody can see through the pocket, right? Even 6'5" quarterbacks are standing behind guys that are generally 6'5", in addition to defensive linemen that are 6'5". Like, there's not, it's not a simple line of sight that because you're 6'5", you can see over everything, because the guys in front of you are the same size. So everybody's working through lanes of vision. But it does mean that you have a harder time generally seeing the middle of the field 15 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, which is where a lot of the NFL passes and pass concepts target. So generally speaking, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, these guys do not work the middle of the field as efficiently as other quarterbacks do. So they have to offset that with other things. And Russell Wilson has had his own unique way of doing that. Kyler Murray has had his own unique way of doing that. Now, the problem is that in recent seasons, that has been less effective than it used to be. So again, now you're saying, okay, and now you're saying, well, you get this guy that's unprecedented small, maybe he gets banged up more because of it, and is as short as any quarterback that's come into the league in years. Can he work the middle of the field as well, and can he stay durable? Now, Bryce Young has worked the middle of the field very well at Alabama, but as we know, Alabama's offense is basically not a real thing. It's like it's fake. It's like a Madden offense. It's not like for like. So again, it's
less
just
so
like,
this year though.
Yeah, it's been the worst version of this Alabama offense for quite a number of years. It's still absurd. Like, they still run concepts that don't exist in the NFL because they can. So it's just the unknown. We've never seen this work before. Doesn't mean it can't, but it just, because that unknown thing has to scare you the more you commit to it.
I liked everything about, I mean, we could do a show where we rank the quarterbacks and get into their skill sets and all that stuff, but I loved how Bryce Young was competitive, led comebacks in close games, more so in his Heisman season. The Tennessee game this year where their defense was terrible, he kept coming back against Tennessee. Was just, he took hits, right? We talk about the hits, and he was tough though. Like, he stands in there, he moves the pocket with a purpose. One thing that's going to drive me nuts during draft season here is when, and I say people loosely, it might just be people in my mentions who don't know, it might be analysts, the people who say Bryce Young doesn't have a good arm because he's small. That's happened with Baker Mayfield, right? There were actual analysts who said Baker Mayfield didn't have a good arm. He does. Bryce Young has a good arm. I described him, he's got that Mariota type release, I think, very quick and efficient, but with a better arm. I don't think Mariota, who did go number 2 overall, I never thought Mariota had a very good arm, like straight up velocity, but he had an incredible release to offset that. I love Bryce Young's release and think he has very good velocity, accuracy, the whole thing. So I think his arm's fine.
Yeah.
Arm talent, off
arm's good.
Off platform and all that stuff. Very good arm. So that's not the issue with the height. It's not a tools thing. It really is the just the outlier aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So the Colts are going Bryce Young at number 1. Is that the way Irsay is going to go here?
I don't know.
Because we've joked that they're the team that's going to, of all the people that would look at Will Levis and say, you at least look like Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning.
Yes.
You're the same size, right? And that's a little bit of human nature.
And by the
which
way,
is like, I've had 2 franchise quarterbacks here in the last 20 years, and you look like the 2 that I've had. And height, stature, arm, and the whole thing, even if Bryce Young's a better prospect.
And if you look at the way that Chris Ballard has sort of built that team generally, they've gone for athletes. Like the linebackers they take have always been these super freak speed.
I just don't know
size guys.
Do you treat quarterback the same way?
But also quarterback. Look at the quarterbacks they brought in, right? It's like prototypical pocket passer Matt Ryan, prototypical pocket passer Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz. Like, he's gone for, give me a 6'4", 230-pound quarterback that can stand tall in the pocket, and you know what I mean? Like, those are the guys.
But because those haven't worked, I don't know if they're in opposite lanes.
But I don't think you go, all right, that didn't work. Who's a 5'10", 170-pound dude who can run around? Like, I don't know. If you were sort of looking at the players they brought in and said, does he have a type? You would say yes, and that type looks a lot like Will Levis.
The PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF.
I've been playing around recently with ChatGPT, the AI chat, the thing that generates responses and anything you want it to, basically. Would you like to know ChatGPT's take on Bryce Young, whether he's too small or not?
I would.
So I asked,
is this going to be an entire segment for us? We could do a whole show.
We could, absolutely. Write that down. We should
write a PFF NFL podcast show for us.
How big a concern? I asked it. How big a concern should Bryce Young's size be? Now, one thing I have discovered about ChatGPT is it does tend to waffle quite a bit. It's on the Ben Stockwell end of the scale in terms of just unnecessary volume of text for a simple question.
Ben catching strays.
So, Bryce Young is a quarterback for the University of Alabama. And at 6 foot tall, around 190 pounds, he's considered undersized for his position by NFL standards. However, there have been many successful NFL quarterbacks who are also considered undersized, such as Russell Wilson and Drew Brees. While size is certainly a factor in football, it's not the only factor that determines a player's success. Bryce Young has shown impressive skills and abilities on the field, including accuracy, mobility, and decision-making. In his first season as Alabama's starting quarterback, he led the team to the national championship game and was named the MVP of the SEC championship game.
Just means more.
It is worth noting that football is a physically demanding sport.
It is.
And smaller players may be at higher risk for injury. However, with proper training and coaching, players can learn techniques to avoid and minimize injuries. Additionally, football is becoming more and more focused on speed and agility, which may give smaller players like Bryce Young an advantage. Overall, while Bryce Young's size may be a consideration for some NFL teams, it should not be the sole determining factor in his future success. His talent, work ethic, and football IQ are likely to be more important factors in his ability to excel at the next level.
Wow. I'll just say, I know you said don't pick on Renner, but if Renner starts getting a little bit long-winded with his draft guide write-ups, like there's a chance he might just go full chat GPT here.
It would be worth monitoring his blurbs to see if they,
this is like
they
when,
start to look like that. Right.
When English teachers were monitoring Cliff's notes.
Right.
English teachers are really good at identifying when you summarized Cliff notes.
Or just deal. Google. Like
now it's cool.
Right in the first couple of sentences and just check that they're not sitting there online somewhere already.
Well, other players have overcome their height. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So good answer. ChatGPT also came up with a very good. I was struggling to write a bio for myself for Sloan because I'm going to be on the Sloan panel in a couple weeks. Be sure to go check that out, either online or you'll buy tickets. It's myself, Thomas Dimitroff, Kevin Demoff of the Rams, Jackie Davidson of the Bucks. So we're all going to be on the football panel, and I needed a 300-word bio, and you typed in, what do you know about Steve Palazzolo? And the bio was way better than what I came up with, other than one little minor.
I was going to say it was way better because it was lies. It started
made me sound good
extensively about your previous football career.
Yeah.
Look,
there's a little bug in the system. It's like, I know he had a career. I know he does football right now. It must have been a football career.
You wouldn't know it from the thing I just read out, but if you're thinking, could I use ChatGPT for all my football, writing needs? It does seem to get quite a lot of things very wrong. Yeah. Like I asked it about a Super Bowl. First of all, it wasn't aware that a Super Bowl had just been played. So I had to go back a year. And then it was very wrong about the details of that Super Bowl, including the score.
Yeah, get the score wrong.
Right.
Could be embarrassing if you just use that line.
So there appears to be quite a lot of detail issues with ChatGPT. Like, for example, it thought Steve had a fairly extensive previous football career before coming to PFF.
It may have been referencing the UMass Lowell Flag football championships that we won.
Yeah? You think that's the problem?
It could have been. It was a football career.
Didn't it also assign you some sort of scouting position somewhere or a coaching role, something like that?
Yeah, maybe at PFF.
No.
Maybe I was the regional scout at PFF that doesn't exist.
Maybe, yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying I wouldn't rush to replacing your entire workforce with ChatGPT.
Good. We're one pick in here, but it's the big one, right? It's the big one.
It gets quicker from here on in.
So at pick number 2, the Houston Texans are going with C.J. Stroud. Is that the right move here for the Houston Texans?
I mean, now that we have a rooting interest in the Houston Texans with PFF Bobby as the offensive coordinator.
Let's text Bobby. Let's do another segment, live text to Bobby. Who is your favorite?
I'm just saying.
Are we out on him for a little bit?
Yeah, we're shunning Bobby the way he shunned us.
Well, I'll pull him aside. We'll try to get some info on his favorite quarterback.
I wouldn't want to give him C.J. Stroud. I don't
You don't think Bobby can make C.J. Stroud good?
Oh, he might be able to. Again, we're playing percentages here. My money wouldn't be on C.J. Stroud as the next quarterback if I had to choose one.
My question here. What is my question here? At number 2 with the Texans.
Yeah.
I forget what I was going to say. Oh, no.
Great.
The thing you're going to hear over and over again. This might not be my best show. The thing you're going to hear over and over about Stroud is how to separate his incredible game against Georgia versus the rest of his season.
Yeah.
Not that the rest of his season wasn't good, but the rest of his season was like I think the perception among scouts, not again, college football fans were like, C.J. Stroud's awesome, Heisman candidate. But among scouts, it was like, this guy's a prospect in between Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields. That's even knowing that Fields dropped.
From that offense.
Right? From that Ohio State offense. Knowing that Fields dropped. But, like, people liked Fields more than Haskins. Haskins felt like a little bit more of a product of the system. C.J. Stroud's probably a more accurate version of Haskins, more mobility. And so he was a higher version of Haskins, but lesser version of Fields. Until the Georgia game.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it was almost like if you said every question mark I have about Stroud, go answer them. And he did in the biggest game where they were a field goal away from going to the college football playoff.
Yeah, it's strange because
Title game.
You can look at it two ways. It's like every concern we had about him, so play under pressure generally in his college career has not been good. He was great under pressure against Georgia. So every sort of issue we have with his game, he fixed it, or he showed really well in that area in the hardest competition on the biggest stage. So you can look at that and say, well, that means obviously he's going to be great at the next level because the stage is bigger and the games are more important and the opposition is better across the board. And if he can do that against Georgia, he can do it in the NFL. Or you can look at it and say, it's one game, and even though it came against the best opposition, sometimes that's just the way it goes, you know? Like, I remember years ago talking to an NFL scout who said, well, I start off and I look at how a guy did against the best opposition, you know? And this is when we were sort of saying one of the important parts about PFF is we do every game, right? We're not just looking at how the guy did against the four best people he played that year, because sometimes you're going to do unusually well against the best guys you faced. And it doesn't mean you're a superstar. It just means you randomly had a great game against like Nick Bosa. You know what I mean? And that was exactly it. He went through and he looked at how this guy played to get a handle on how good he was against the best four opponents he faced that year. And he just so happened that his best four games were against the best four people he played. But the really crappy games came against like marginal NFL players. And like, well, those are important as well.
They matter too, yeah.
Because if he goes and shits the bed against a terrible opponent, that guy's going to wreck shop as well, and he's still no good. So I tend to think that it's an intriguing data point, what he did against Georgia. I don't think it invalidates or eradicates multiple years of not being great in those areas, though. And I'm more concerned by those than I am encouraged by the one random game against Georgia.
But a big part of that with quarterback, and I'm less likely to have strong takes on quarterbacks given what we've seen the last couple of years, a big part of it is showing the can-do, right? Showing that you can do these things in the Georgia game. So then people also point to the Northwestern game where the stat line says 10 for 26 for 76 yards, which, you know, came in a rainstorm and it was windy and all that stuff. But both of those things happened in the same season. I also do like to point out, I know it was a completely different era, but there was a game where Peyton Manning, I think it was his senior year too, against South Carolina, like at some random game, had a similar stat line. I got to look it up, but it was something like 11 for 25 for 80 yards, something ridiculous. That was Peyton Manning, who's still the best prospect and ended up becoming, you know, top 3 quarterback of all time. So take it all with a grain of salt, however you want. I just feel like here's my take on C.J. Stroud. I'm fine taking him. Do you think he's better than Kenny Pickett? I think he's better than Kenny Pickett.
I don't know. I think he's kind of in that area, to be honest, for me. I don't love what he does. I don't think he's physically dramatically better than Kenny Pickett. I would put him somewhere in that bucket.
We were hating Kenny Pickett at 6.
Yeah.
We were hating him in the top 10 last year.
I don't think I would take C.J. Stroud in the top 10.
Okay. I feel like Stroud's the type of quarterback I'd be fine with as we talk about the first contract quarterbacks. I think he's the type of guy that could run an offense, be good, build the team around him, and you could do some damage, right, with him as a first contract quarterback. I also think C.J. Stroud's the guy a year from now, if the Texans are picking in the top 5, or if they're picking at 1, they're like, man, I want Caleb Williams or Drake May. I want that. There are shinier objects out there over Stroud that if they have the opportunity.
You want to use Stroud as a vehicle to get to a real quarterback next year.
I'm not saying as a vehicle. I'm saying if I had to build around Stroud for the next 4 years, I think you could build a good enough team. I also said if you are positioned in the top 10 next year and you just drafted CJ Stroud, you're going to say, man, he would not go top 10 this year. Like last year, maybe he would, weak quarterback class. This year, questionable quarterback class. Hate to always point to, hey, next year, but we're looking at Drake May, redshirt sophomore, Caleb Williams, both look like potential top 8 type of quarterbacks. Maybe another one emerges, but those two guys in particular are going to dwarf Stroud and maybe even Bryce Young from a prospect.
But that lets you potentially go Rosen Murray on it.
Oh yeah. So you're saying, look, if you draft Stroud, he's not great. I already don't have a great infrastructure in Houston. It's going to take more than 1 year. Maybe he is a guy that can help get me there.
Yeah.
But it also proposes the question. This is why I brought up with the Texans. Do you have this multi-year view? And I think you were trying to get at this a little bit when you talked to Rick. How much are you looking to the future? If you're the Texans, would you actually bring in a Jimmy Garoppolo as your bridge for now? Maybe draft another player, get another person in the building, not draft a quarterback and say, yeah, we are going to look till next year. Or maybe you trade out too.
I would draft a quarterback. It wouldn't be CJ Stroud for me.
So you're going Will Levis?
Yes.
Or Anthony Richardson?
Levis.
So you'd go Levis here at 2.
Yep.
So there you go. Trying to hit a home run. That's what you're trying to do.
I don't even think – I think his floor is higher.
You think Will Levis
I think he's just better, period.
You think Will Levis is just purely better than C.J. Stroud?
Yes. His process, I think, is superior. His tools are better. I think his ceiling is better. Everything about him is better. I don't think that – I don't see the area where Stroud is superior. Accuracy, maybe, but, like, that's about it.
Stroud reminds me of Trubisky. I wanted to write him off a few times, and then he sucked me back in.
How'd that work out?
Completely sucked in by the end. I didn't know what I was doing at that time. I'm better now. All right, let's go to number 3 overall here. Remember, reviewing Todd McShay's mock draft here. These are not our picks, but Sam's given his pick at number 2.
You've steadfastly remained on the fence.
On what?
Everything. Except when Dan Patrick held your feet to the fire and said, make a call.
I did what I said, the Colts. That was the right move by the Colts. Trade up and get Bryce Young. I would do that.
At 2?
I think I'd go Stroud right now. I got more work to do on the quarterbacks.
Okay.
That's what I say all the way up till draft night. Got more work to do. Let you know in September.
Look back at the tape.
Let you know after the preseason. Arizona Cardinals at 3. They're going Will Anderson, edge rusher, Alabama.
Sure.
Who ESPN still calls an outside linebacker. They still do the old school outside linebackers.
Yeah, we're not for changing at ESPN.
No.
Outside linebacker, defensive tackle.
So, Will Anderson, and then number 4 is the Bears going Jalen Carter at defensive tackle. I think the consensus is those are the top 2 non-quarterbacks, both on the defensive line. I think these are expected picks here.
Yeah, and for the Bears, jackpot. That's the exact dream scenario for them. They trade down to 4. They pick up a first-rounder next year. I'm going to say that maybe is a yes. So they pick up the first-round pick next year, which is a hedge against Justin Fields not being good this year. If he isn't, A, their pick is going to be pretty high. B, they have a second first-round pick just to make sure that they can jump to wherever they need to jump to get one of those quarterbacks next year. And in Jalen Carter in particular, I think they pick up probably the best defensive player in the draft and the player best suited for their team. I think this is literally the best possible scenario for Chicago. Not to jump ahead of Arizona entirely, but that's like, of those 2 picks, that's the thing that jumps out.
Yeah, so I think it's a good spot. Remember, so I think both, here's a strong take, both Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, if they were in last year's draft, either one of them goes number 1. Over Trayvon Walker, over Aiden Hutchinson. We thought Aiden Hutchinson was the slam dunk number 1.
Yeah.
If Hutch was in this draft, he's the 3rd non-quarterback off the board.
I think that's probably true.
It's not that strong. I think a lot of people might agree with that. But it just kind of showed where I think last year's draft was.
Certainly Carter. And when you consider that Anderson has long been seen as the best edge rusher in the nation, that makes sense as well. So, yeah.
People were debating the college exploits of Will Anderson and Aiden Hutchinson. I think Aiden Hutchinson won awards over Will Anderson. Bama fans were upset because he had more sacks. So I think that makes sense. Arizona needs help on the defensive line. the Bears need help on the defensive line. We always talk positional value and is the interior of the D-line a good enough position? I do think where I think where I agree with some NFL people is the blue chip concept. If you do have a blue chipper at pretty much any position besides running back, they'll have enough of an impact that it doesn't matter.
You, Mr. Touchy-feely, doesn't matter, man. Would you, if you're the Cardinals, would you draft a quarterback? And if not, why not?
I think you're just tied. I think you're tied to Kyler Murray.
Yeah, but he's not playing until like November at the earliest. So at the very minimum, you need one now. What's the downside in taking a quarterback, having him play his rookie season? Maybe Kyler Murray comes back 100% healthy in November or December, and then you put him on the bench and he can learn a little bit, Steve Young style, from behind, and push Kyler Murray. You know, hey, your job's not secure. You can let me show you something, huh?
Because I need Kyler Murray to work because he's invested in.
Isn't this gonna
40 plus.
He's gonna work now because there's a guy pushing him for his job. Can't just spend his entire time playing Call of Duty anymore.
The Cardinals work better with an elite edge rusher rather than just a backup quarterback.
He's not a backup for the first 3 quarters of the season.
Yeah, I don't care about this season. Like if I just took over, the Cardinals are in full rebuild mode. I don't care about this season. So I'm certainly not drafting a quarterback for this season. And I'm not drafting one for the sole purpose of pushing Kyler Murray. If Daniel Jones is my quarterback, I think the Giants have a different consideration here. If the Giants were to sign Daniel Jones to one of those 2-year, it's essentially like a 2-year deal. We can get out after 2 years at say $30 million, like a Tannehill-esque deal. I think the Giants would do something like that. Because then you have a rookie contract quarterback who could take over in year 3. And now, like in hindsight, with the Packers, Jordan Love's about to take over here in year 4, is it? Whatever. Jordan Love's about to take over, maybe a year later than he should have, if you're, drawing it out for the Packers. That makes sense to me. I think you're tied to Kyler Murray for at least a couple of years. You're not trading him or anything, so I wouldn't do it. Would you?
No, but I'm not the guy that says it doesn't matter if you put 2 quarterbacks in the building that both want the job and both should have the job and therefore create chaos.
Yeah, I think Kyler's in that top 8 to 10 mix though, right? My rule is generally if you get in, if you know you've got that top 8 to 10 quarterback or whatever that cutoff is, then it's like go all out, build around that guy. Arizona's already made that investment in that guy. See Jonathan Gannon? He's going to do that's what he did.
The hell is that?
That's what he did when he met Kyler.
Uh-huh.
He made noises like they were going to take shots.
Pew pew?
Yeah, that stuff.
Uh-huh.
That's what they did.
Okay.
I'm not going to overreact, though. We did this with Nick Sirianni. I'm not going to overreact to first impressions.
All right.
So, yeah, I like Will Anderson at 3 and Jalen Carter at 4 for the Bears. What I don't like is the Seattle Seahawks taking Tyree Wilson at 5. I don't know the best way to go here. This is the tipping point.
Isn't this a very Seattle pick, though? Like,
yes.
This is, I don't want to say he's LJ Collier because that didn't work out, but it sort of has feelings of that,
Well, no, because LJ Collier was a guy that people liked as a day 2 player, potentially, maybe round 3, that they took in round 1.
Okay,
and hasn't worked.
A
lot of people are going to like Tyree Wilson.
Sure.
He's got...
I'm not one of them, though, so far.
I'm not either. But Tyree Wilson has the explosiveness, the length. He's going to have like 35.5-inch arms. He's got that built-in-a-lab type of defensive end body, edge defender body. I don't know. I don't think he's going to run the same way Trayvon Walker. I don't think he's going to break the combine like a Trayvon Walker.
No. Well,
but he might be the closest thing to the look being better than the on-field production in a Trayvon Walker sense.
I can see him breaking the combine in the way some people do or some people are said to when they don't sort of look at this is what differentiates Trayvon Walker from all these other guys is you get these guys who go, oh, this guy broke the combine, and it's because he ran a really fast 40 and he had a great vertical and or broad jump, and you're like, wow, those are incredible numbers. Like, yeah, but he didn't think the 3-cone was terrible or the change of direction stuff wasn't good. The difference with Walker is that his numbers were insane everywhere. Everything was nuts. I can see Tyree being straight line very good I can also see him struggling at the change of direction stuff a bit more, relatively.
Yeah. He's the first guy, like, going back to the draft model. If you want to look at production, and all I have is production numbers right now. These will change once the combine comes in. Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are in that blue chip type of status, right? They make sense. Tyree Wilson's the first one who doesn't. In part, and there might be multiple reasons for that. We might have a similar conversation as Trayvon Walker, which is Texas Tech's not using him as a pure edge all the time. He's playing contain a ton in 3-man rushes. For me, it's more there's 1 year of production there for Tyree Wilson. If you just look at his 1 year of production, like you can get there. You can get there for kind of saying I understand. He's the first guy I think where I don't want to be the team that takes him. Seattle at 5 is fascinating because we'll know much more about their intentions after free agency. Presumably they're going to bring back Geno Smith, either with a franchise tag or some sort of long-term deal. Now, this is where I would say the same thing I said about Daniel Jones. If I give Geno Smith that 2-year-ish type of contract, or 2 years plus, but there's an out after year 2, I'm drafting a quarterback here. I would draft the next quarterback, have him sit behind Geno Smith. I would hedge my bets and all that fun stuff. Seattle probably won't, so they will probably take the best non-position player unless the Panthers are trying to jump the Raiders. Right, those are the next 2 players here. The Raiders are at 7, needing a quarterback, and the Panthers are at 9, needing a quarterback. The Raiders also might have Aaron Rodgers pure, right from the darkness, and they might just be drafting the best player they can at 7. So.
I will say, if the draft unfolds like this, I think this is the first pick where Seattle is in kind of a tough spot because
this is the tipping point, right? Where it's like you kind of like run out of blue chip non-quarterbacks. But we'll also see if they want to.
Yeah, or the kind of blue chips that may potentially be on the board or at positions that either you don't need or are, high value positions. So when you're talking about drafting number 5, even if you needed one, you're not taking Bijan Robinson, presumably, a running back. So there's a couple of offensive tackles people might put into that category. You just drafted 2 offensive tackles last season, both of whom played pretty well as rookies. The cornerbacks probably aren't in that category, even if you think you need one of those. Like, I think they're just in a weirdly difficult spot of it probably has to be defensive line. You probably just have to pick your favorite, and there's a big drop between Will Anderson and anybody else.
Peter Skoronski, who ends up going at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons at tackle, because he's got the short arms, people could project him to guard. I think he could play guard. That could be an interesting one if Seattle goes that route and say, we have our 2 tackles and we're going to take Skoronski, who's a tackle, but make him a guard, much like Brandon Scherf went 5 overall to Washington a couple years ago as a tackle, converted to guard, become a really good guard. That could be the other move maybe for Seattle. But they're going to go Tyree Wilson. I think it's going to be a very common pick here. And either way, they need help on the defensive line, right? They need a ton of help on the D-line. They couldn't get after the quarterback efficiently, so I could see that happening. At 6, Detroit Lions go Myles Murphy, another edge defender coming out of Clemson. He's a little bit different player from Tyree Wilson, more of a power player. He's really strong. He's good. And now I'm starting to see him all over the place. He was a consensus top 10. I'm seeing other people mock draft him in the back end of the first round. I think he's a good player, good prospect. I think I feel better about him middle of the first or later in the first, but this would be Detroit adding to Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston and really just trying to make this into a position of a ton of strength here for the Lions.
Yeah, this another intriguing pick because I wouldn't necessarily add to that defensive line, but again, they're in that category of, well, what's the alternative at this point? Again, they're not drafting a tackle, probably. A cornerback would be the one, but that's the biggest kind of, is there a corner worth anything like a top 10 pick in this draft? And I think so far the consensus appears to be no. So again, Detroit ends up in quite a difficult spot.
We'll see the corner run here later, and we talk a lot about the value of corner and all that stuff, but it's about scarcity as well. So the Patriots end up becoming the first team to draft a corner. It's not till 14, but then there's 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 6. Yeah, 3 out of 4 corners go between 14 and 17 overall in this draft. And I think that's where people feel more comfortable drafting the corners here. because there's not a Sauce Gardner. There's not a Derek Stingley. I know Stingley didn't have the best rookie season, but he was that level. Those guys were that level of corner prospect, top 5 type of corner prospects, like a Jalen Ramsey, like a Patrick Peterson. We don't really have those guys there. Maybe it puts Detroit in a tough spot, like you're saying here.
I mean, it is also potentially, again, if the draft has come this far, number one, I think Detroit would potentially trade out at this stage. I think that's another option. You've got the Raiders 1 pick behind lurking. You've got Carolina 2 picks behind lurking. Atlanta, maybe if they're in the quarterback market. Further than that, like there are teams, I think, hovering for these quarterbacks. Maybe Detroit or even Seattle can convince somebody to trade out or can trade up to get their quarterback, and they have a much better life by trading back, getting some picks, and still being able to take whoever it is they would have ended up with. Alternatively, like Detroit could take a quarterback. I know, Jared Goff has played well for them. It still feels like there has to be a lingering feeling of we can do better than this.
Especially with the extra pick, right? That's part of the luxury of having. They have 2 first-rounders. They're definitely, their second pick is definitely in the mix for where you might get the next corner. So that part makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I like Jared Goff. He's fine. He had a good season. That's fine. But the teams that are trying to win Super Bowls were moving on from Jared Goff a couple years ago. You should be looking for that next option. The Lions do go corner later on at 18 with Keely Ringo from Georgia, so they end up getting the corner. That part makes sense if you're just playing the board, playing where these positions are probably going to slot. So now you get 2 very good defensive players. I understand the intrigue there, but certainly the quarterback should not be off the board for the Lions. The other thing is if they, things go south this year and they're, you just handle it next year, right? If Goff lets you down, you just handle it next year. Raiders at 7. This is where the next QB comes off the board. This is Will Levis. Mm-hmm. Again, we'll know more. If Aaron Rodgers, I think he's the favorite. I think the favorite for landing Aaron Rodgers is the Raiders. That changes everything. If they're picking at 7 and they get their pick of maybe the top tackle or whatever it might be, that's intriguing with Aaron Rodgers on the roster. Presumably they'll have the 7th pick maybe given up, actually. But Will Levis, is he the guy for Josh McDaniels here?
Yeah, assuming they don't have Aaron Rodgers, I think this would be a great outcome for the Raiders. I mean, as I said, I think Levis should be the second quarterback off the board. I think there's a not insignificant chance that he goes number 1 overall because, to me, he's the obvious antithesis of Bryce Young if there are teams that are scared of Bryce Young's size. Like, to me, they're going to gravitate. Those teams gravitate to Levis more than they would gravitate to C.J. Stroud, in my eyes. So if you're the Colts and Chris Ballard and the type that they've displayed, whatever, like if you're not a Bryce Young team or guy, I think Levis is your guy. So I think there's a reasonable chance that he goes number 1. If Bryce Young is off the board, he would be my second quarterback. So for him to fall all the way to 7 for the Raiders, I think it's perfect for them.
Just like the C.J. Stroud question is going to be like, how much do we weigh the Georgia game? With Levis, it's how much do you weigh a disappointing final season with a very good second to last season, right? And all the tools, mobility, cannon for an arm, and all that stuff.
This was something that, we didn't have a chance to pick at a little bit more with Rick Spielman, but, he talked a lot about sort of you don't want to make excuses for these guys and you can have a long list of excuses. I think there's quite an important element of, actually identifying what's real and what isn't in terms of excuses and reasons. Like, there's a difference there, right? Is this an excuse for why, like, are we trying to excuse bad play from a player? Or are we saying, okay, it's important that whilst looking at this bad play, we identify 3 confounding factors that really played into it, like, bad supporting cast, bad whatever, you know what I mean? I think it is quite important to look at this most recent year for Levis and say, like, what was around him, because it really didn't help.
And again, for the next few years, I'm going to fall back on the recency bias stuff, right? We would push back on Josh Allen arguments, which were like, oh, he's not playing with NFL players at Wyoming. He doesn't have this or that. And I think those excuses proved correct, where we focused on the fact that he was extremely, well, I don't even know if they were correct. It depends on how you weigh it, right? obviously Josh Allen, everybody acknowledges he was inaccurate in college and made poor decisions. But was he partially held back because of a supporting cast? That was one of the excuses made. Or did he just improve at the NFL level? Or is it because all the stuff that we couldn't see, that this guy was going to work harder, because he was a good athlete, he was going to be able to get it, improve his footwork, improve his accuracy, and all that stuff, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, also one difference between the Josh Allen thing and this, whether it's true or not, is Josh Allen's lack of competition is potentially offset by the fact that his lack of supporting cast, rather, is potentially offset by the fact that his competition was Wyoming level as well.
Right.
Whereas Kentucky's lack of supporting cast, they're playing in the SEC. So, not having players around him is quite important when you're running up against literally the best teams in the nation on a regular basis.
Yeah, so those are interesting ones. Other people wanted us to bring up Christian Ponder with Rick.
Hey, Rick, what went wrong there?
I mean, look, he's honest about a lot of that stuff. I mean, I could have talked for 5 hours.
Yes,
with Rick,
that's the problem.
Honestly,
we could have spent a lot of time on a lot of things.
I'm only bringing up Ponder for a second because he was a guy, if people remember back, 2011 draft class, his second to last year was better than his final season. His second to last year, Christian Ponder, was really, 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 really good. He had some games. He had this game against North Carolina where I thought he looked unbelievable. Never really had a great arm, but he was a very good quarterback in college. His final season, he had some elbow injury, wasn't all that good on the field. Kind of similar to Levis, right, where the best work is 2 years removed. Josh Allen's best work was 2 years removed. So those are interesting discussions in the draft. How much do you weigh the final season, the last thing that you saw, versus the entire body of work? But Levis goes at 7, puts the Falcons on the board. They might be in the quarterback market as well, like you said. They're going Peter Skoronski, the tackle from Northwestern here, though, to shore up the offensive line.
Yeah, which I think makes some sense. They're probably losing Caleb McGarry into free agency, who had a career year this year anyway in the most run-heavy offense in the NFL. That has a feel of David Quessenberry to it, coming off a career year where you were primarily dominant as a run blocker, not so much as a pass protector. Yeah, I would let that guy walk and expect him not necessarily to do that again next year. So replacing him kind of like for like with the best offensive tackle on your board, I think makes a lot of sense.
And then we get to number 9. The Carolina Panthers are going with Anthony Richardson. And this is where Todd drops in a little nugget from the Elias Sports Bureau.
Oh, yeah?
That we've never seen 3 or more teams hire a new coach and draft a new quarterback in the top 10 in the same season. So that would be the Colts at 1, the Texans at 2, and then the Panthers at 9.
I'm massively fascinated by the mechanics of how that nugget comes about. How does the system work that it just sort of flags X thing has never happened?
I think it starts from Todd sitting here with his ghostwriter saying, hey, pick Anthony Richardson at 9.
Uh-huh.
And then the light bulb goes off. He goes, another new coach, get another new
So you think
quarterback.
it's entirely
and then
human-driven?
Then he looks up and he's like, wow, this team, right? The Colts have a new coach and a quarterback. Texans have a new coach and quarterback. Now the Panthers do. I wonder how often this happens.
Yeah.
And then you call Elias. You get in the old phone, you get the rotary dial, you call him up, call Elias, tell them to look it up.
So that's the red phone with the button. Just the one
yeah.
button.
Call up Elias.
Yeah.
At any time of the night. It's probably 24/7 answering service. Elias goes, they, type it out, and they fax back an answer.
So you think it's entirely human-driven as opposed to some random database that's highlighting random-ass things that have never happened before?
Yeah, how would that work?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, Todd's not just he types in Anthony Richardson and it's ding, 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 ding. You just had a third quarterback go in the top 10.
But there are
with a new
people who
quarterback
tweet
and coach.
things that look a lot like that's what happens. It's here's just the 5 random things that have never happened before this week.
No, that's why you
Courtesy
get
of
the
the
stuff.
Elias Sports Bureau.
That's why you get stuff with so many parameters. It's
yeah.
I wonder how many quarterbacks have had 3,000 passing yards and 700 rushing yards and 10 passing touchdowns and 10 rushing touchdowns and 4 fumbles. You type it all in, and it returns back the 3 guys that have done that. So there you go, on the red phone. Call the red phone.
Okay.
I think Anthony Richardson is, I'll repeat this a million times between the draft. He'll be polarizing not in the evaluation, but in the valuation. Anthony Richardson will be polarizing in where people value this skill set. I think almost every scouting report's going to look the same.
Yeah.
Right? We're all going to agree what we've seen from Anthony Richardson.
Well, he's the classic like test of what we've learned in recent years of these toolsy quarterbacks working out, right? It's like, all right, given that X has happened, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, whatever, like this run of quarterbacks that have had skill sets that are unusual, that have all panned out. Now Anthony Richardson comes along. It's like, all right, what did you learn? Because here's your test case. A guy who does not play the quarterback position the way it's supposed to be played, quote unquote, drawn up by the book, but has absurd physical tools and does try and do a lot of things, from the pocket. And like you can see him trying to do good process. It just doesn't work yet. So, all right, are you going to turn him into Josh Allen? Or do you think that there was a special set of circumstances that caused Josh Allen to be Josh Allen? Like, to me, this is like a really intriguing case study in what the NFL thinks now after that run.
So here's what I think about those comparisons. The Josh Allen comp makes sense from just a tool standpoint, but from a production standpoint, Josh Allen had an incredible, people want me to say penultimate season instead of second to last.
Good word.
Penultimate season. Word. Penultimate season for Josh Allen was fantastic, right? So Josh Allen was actually a more productive college quarterback in my mind than Anthony Richardson. I do think there are some comparisons to Justin Fields where I think Richardson's athleticism could step right in, and he's a top 3 or 4 runner at the quarterback position. Is he right up there? I think Lamar and Fields have put themselves in a different category now. I wasn't expecting Fields to be there. Jalen Hurts, different stylistically, but he's up there from a production standpoint. Daniel Jones, of course. Josh Allen. But I think Richardson's right up there in that conversation where you're raising the floor of your offense.
Absolutely.
Despite a high ceiling player like Richardson.
Well done on remembering Vanilla Vic.
You have to.
Have to, always.
I mean, Jones, top 20 rushing quarterback in a season of all time.
Of all time, yeah.
Yeah. 6 or 7 first downs.
It's one of the most inexplicable things to have ever happened in the NFL.
But he's fast.
But it's there.
He's fast. So Richardson at least does that for your offense. And then it also reminds me a little bit of Lamar Jackson, where I think we had the proper criticism of Lamar. Like, he missed a lot of throws, right? He still misses a lot of throws. But he also has a lot of really good accurate throws. He also was not the narrative of I'm just going to run around and make a play. Lamar Jackson was never that at Louisville or with the Ravens. He does go through reads, progressions, and the whole thing. Richardson does that stuff, right? He tries, right? He tries to, he steps up in the pocket well. He does subtle quarterback things well. He just misses a ton of throws. He misses a ton of throws, and he's just so inconsistent. But he's also got this high level of running ability and an absolute cannon for an arm.
Yeah, this is one of the most popular player to team picks in mock drafts I've seen. A lot of people have Richardson ending up in Carolina and at 9 as well. So it makes a lot of sense. They still need to keep swinging at quarterback. So it is one that connects the dots quite well. I do think that Richardson, a lot of people are going to be talking about him. Does he need to sit year 1? All those kinds of things. I think we're reaching this point now where if you can bring that rushing threat to the table, I don't think you necessarily need to sit year 1. Now, I kind of thought that a little bit about Malik Willis as well, and he really didn't. That wouldn't have gone well if Malik Willis had to play year 1. We saw that, they gave him a game, and then we're like, you know what, actually we're going to sign Josh Dobbs off the street and do that better. So there's obviously a limit to that, but I don't think it's necessarily an automatic that you draft Richardson, you need to sit him for the first year.
Are those the two ends of the spectrum that teams are going to look at here, though, and say, some are going to look at Anthony Richardson and say, well, look at Josh Allen. This is the closest thing we've seen since Josh Allen, size, speed, arm strength-wise. And then other people might look at Malik Willis and say, even though we were pushing him as a first-rounder last year because we play this keep swinging at quarterback's game, right? He falls to the 3rd, and when he did play, to your point, he wasn't ready. He shouldn't have been out there. Are people going to look and say, well, the last thing we saw was Malik Willis, Richardson, similar, I don't want that in the first round.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you need to be extremely incapable as a passing quarterback. And from that, I don't mean the throws you can make, but like, can you read a defense? Can you work through passing concepts? Can you run through reads? You need to be very, very far away from that stuff, I think, to offset being a special athlete from a rushing point of view in today's NFL. Like, I think that's the point we've reached where the floor that being a dynamic rushing athlete brings is so high that you need to be terrible from a passing point of view to offset that completely. Justin Fields wasn't good as a passing quarterback and was still getting all kinds of crazy talk during the season because he was that good as a runner. So if Richardson is anything like what he looks like rushing-wise, he would need to be truly awful, I think, to not start and not play in year one from a passing point of view.
Man, do you think teams should just try to sit a guy for the entire year and stay dedicated to it? I know the stats, like it depends on how you view the stats, right? But if we're talking about Tom Brady, sad, and Patrick Mahomes, sad, and Carson Palmer, like there's this list of players who legitimately didn't play their first year other than like a game. And I know there's also guys who just start right away and go. Is it okay to just stay dedicated to that and just say, well, you're literally just going to sit and learn this entire year, we'll unleash you in year two?
I'm just not sure what you learn from being on the sideline anymore. Like, you don't get the practice time. So I think there might have been a time where you could learn from the sideline because you would get a lot of practice reps as number two. You don't get that anymore because practice time is so small and diminished and therefore valuable. All the reps go to the starter. So you're not getting the kind of practice time that you might need to get better off the field. The only way it makes any kind of sense is if you need to be kind of taught schematic football, of a sort of basic X's and O's level that you're not there. And I doubt that many guys are getting drafted anything like, the top round of the draft if they're not on that page already. Like, if you're so far off, part of what they do is they bring these guys in, they put them up on a chalkboard and they say, all right, what's your favorite play? Draw it up. What would happen against this defense? Like, they try and find out where you are from a quote unquote football IQ standpoint. So if you fail that, I don't think anybody's getting drafted in the first round. That's the only way I think you get any value out of learning from the sideline. I think you need to be playing. And the only thing for me is the only thing that would invalidate that is if the situation around you is so terrible that by playing you actually harm the guy's development. You could definitely make that case for Justin Fields last year, and he overcame it, which I think is a reason that I would keep him around and not trade him away.
Right.
But that would be the only thing that would make me want to sit a quarterback for his rookie year now, is if I looked at the situation, I go, this guy will get worse playing within this situation. Like, for his own protection and therefore for this team's future betterment, he can't play.
We've talked about having like extra QB coaches and stuff like that. Like, what if and you've also made the statement that the Ravens just went away in the basement and crafted a Lamar Jackson offense, mm-hmm. right? While they had Joe Flacco in their transition year. What if a team did that? Have a transition year, have an extra QB coach or something just for Richardson or whoever, and all you're doing all year is fundamentals, skills, new offense, whatever it might be. And that's all your focus is. Your entire organizational philosophy is this guy needs to be ready for next year. He's our third stringer this year.
Yeah,
could be any quarterback.
I don't think that's going to take you all year. I mean, it didn't take Lamar and the Ravens all year to get that figured out. I can see that being a reason you keep a guy on the bench till the bye week or whatever.
Yeah.
We need to build a whole offense around him. We need to teach him a few bits and pieces. We need to get a quarterback coach working with him, and that's going to take a few months.
My take, though, is whenever they're ready,
yeah.
Week 10, Week 14, and we've seen Jalen Hurts took over late his rookie season, continued to progress. Lamar Jackson took over late his rookie season, continued to progress. So there's examples of it working every which way.
I'm just not sure I would buy somebody selling me the idea that needs to take 12 months to happen.
All right, let's break down some of the non-QB picks here. At number 10, the Philadelphia Eagles. They were in the Super Bowl. They still have the number 10 pick because of their trade last year with the Saints. Brian Bresee, defensive tackle from Clemson, is where Todd's going here.
Right position, wrong player, I think, would be my interpretation of this one.
Who's the player?
Who's the correct player? Who should they take?
Yeah, did you have another player in mind?
Not necessarily. I just think Brian Bresee is not the guy I would want to take at number 10 overall.
Oh, okay. It's just not that good.
Right.
For you. Him and Miles Murphy are both Clemson guys. I've seen the ebbs and flows of where they're going here. A lot of people have them in the top 10, and I do see a lot more people having them in the 20s and 30s, or 20s, late 20s.
Yeah.
Now, Bresee's a good, solid player. I mean, he's fine.
That's not selling number 10 overall, though.
No, I get it. If you're I don't want to rehash the whole Saints trade. We'll do that another time here, where you go back and say this would be pick number 10 theoretically for the Saints. They gave up all those picks just for Chris Olave, Trevor Penning. That's what they got out of it. Olave was essentially worth 5 picks. This is one of those picks, I believe. When you deconstruct that trade, that needs to be worth, that adds up to the worth of Chris Olave. And I think Olave is fantastic, but this is where the Saints, who are pushing the credit card debt, really start to have their depth challenged because they don't have this number 10 pick here, which would be a nice, cheap, presumably a good player. Mm-hmm. An intriguing place to go here for the Eagles would be corner.
They do get a first-rounder bank, though, from the Sean Payton gig.
True, but those are separate worlds, right?
Sure, but I mean, it's lower down, but it's not like they just don't have a first-round pick this year.
No, I get it. I'm just saying you could have both.
Yeah.
You can have both. I mean, it's like the people who say, well, we got a comp pick, so we traded it because we weren't supposed to have it. Like, you kind of were supposed to have it.
I'm with you that trading away their first-rounder for last year was bad, but I'm just saying they did manage to mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, Bresee's a solid player. I'm curious, and I think defensive line always makes sense for the Eagles. That's an organizational philosophy. That's where they're going to go with things. I wonder if they should if they would look at corner here, because this is where the corner value starts to become good, right? Between 10 and 20. James Bradbury's a free agent. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's more of a safety, but flexible player that's a free agent. Mm-hmm. Brian Branch could fit in to that role. I think I've seen him mocked there. He'll go a little bit later. The nickel/safety for Bama could be a good fit. But I wonder if corner, the place where they were so patient last year and made one of my favorite moves of the offseason, James Bradbury, if that could be in play here for the Eagles.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. They're in this position where they have probably the best roster in the NFL. They're just picking around the various elements of how can we tweak here or there. They're always reloading on the defensive line. That's an obvious area, and then secondary would be the other one.
Breaking down Todd McShay's mock draft at pick number 11, the Tennessee Titans are going Paris Johnson, the offensive tackle for Ohio State's second offensive tackle off the board, and making sense here for Tennessee, where a friend of the show, Taylor Lewan, could be on his way out. Paris Johnson could be his replacement, potentially a left tackle here.
I'm sure I'd go all the way to friend of the show.
Anyone who's been on the show is a friend.
The Titans had the worst offensive line in the NFL last year. Some of that was injuries, some of it wasn't. So any pick on the offensive line for Tennessee, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Anything else to add to that?
Not really. Take your favorite offensive lineman, draft him at number 11, and move on.
We have not neglected the Titans. That's just, it's a tackle pick.
Mm-hmm.
Houston Texans at 12, so they're back up on the clock. Cleveland Browns pick here from the Deshaun Watson trade. Texans are going Quentin Johnson here in Todd McShay's draft. Wide receiver, TCU.
Yeah. Quentin Johnson is going to be, I think, the most fascinating wide receiver debate this year. I don't like him as much as other people. Mike Renner loves him, and you can kind of see why people do like him, because this is another year where there aren't a ton of prototypical size freak type receivers. There aren't these guys that are 6 foot, 6'3" plus, big, fast, that type of receiver. It's not a year for those guys. Now, you don't always need those guys, right? Garrett Wilson wasn't one of those players a year ago, and he was really, really good, rookie of the year caliber. But if you're a team looking for that, who's the guy that can come closest to Julio Jones in this draft? You have to start with that kind of body size, because it does make a difference. And you can see there are elements of Quentin Johnson's game where he has movement skills for a guy that size that are rare, that are unusual. But he's not as good a wide receiver as some of these other guys. So it's another case of how much do you value physical tools versus polish at the position. And we know that there are NFL teams that value the physical part way more than the other part.
And the other thing about wide receiver that we like to harp on here, like the previous pick at tackle, if we looked at Paris Johnson and said, he's a good pass blocker, but he's terrible as a run blocker, you can't really hide that. Like, you have to run block. You have to be able to do both things. At receiver, you don't have to do everything. I mean, if you say this guy's not good in the short game or doesn't, he's not good after the catch, that's fine. You're our deep threat. You're our big body deep threat. That makes it easier, I think, to get away with receiver picks when you have players who aren't as polished. And then, especially with a Quentin Johnson, you can't teach the size and the speed. So if those things develop, great. If they don't develop, you can have a DK Metcalf type. I don't think he's DK Metcalf as a prospect, but DK, all he did was run goes and slants his first year.
Yeah.
And that was fine. Like, if he didn't develop any other part of his game, he was still valuable there because he was so good at it. Quentin Johnson, there might be elements of that to his game, but I just don't love parts of his game as well, like you're saying.
There's another nugget in this.
I like the nugget. I looked it up to
But
confirm
this one is from ESPN Stats and Info. Elias, they drop the ball on that.
That's
one.
the green phone.
The green phone.
You call
but
it
I'm
the
like,
green phone.
Again, Mr. What's the mechanism here? How did Elias not have this one?
Well, I think what happens is you start.
You check ESPN. If
With
they don't
stats
have
and
it, you
info.
go to Elias. You
And
hit the red
ESPN
phone.
Stats and Info doesn't go all the way back. Elias has been doing this thing since like the 30s, Stats and Info hasn't been going back as far.
Okay.
So if you're saying this is the first time since, you go to Stats and Info.
Right.
If you're saying if this is the first time in history, you go to Elias.
Okay. So his nugget is, if the Texans go this route, they'd be the first team since 2010 to draft a quarterback and a new receiver for him in the same first round when Denver did it.
That'd be Tim Tebow and the late Demaryius Thomas. That was the combo.
Okay.
Why does baseball talk pop up? Baseball, rugby talk? Am I on delay here? What happened? Anyway. Quentin Johnson at 12 to the Houston Texans. Don't make faces at me during awkward silences. New York Jets are at 13. They go Broderick Jones, the tackle from Georgia.
Yeah.
I like Broderick Jones. I think he's a first-round tackle. How's that?
Okay. The Jets' offensive line is a weird one because they kind of fell apart last year, largely due to injuries. I think they actually have a pretty good starting five if all five of those guys were healthy. So how do you treat that going forward?
You can't bank on Mekhi Becton at this point.
Yeah. Do you just try and insure it with extra bodies and keep going? Or do you work on the basis that actually if five guys just don't get hurt next year, we're in a pretty good spot?
I mean, picking a tackle's fine because Becton's in the last year of his contract, regardless of whether or not he plays. He's only played a handful of snaps, literally just like hundreds of snaps in his NFL career.
Yeah.
So you can't rely on him there. Right tackle's still a bit of a question, right? George Fant, isn't he even
Free agency.
Yeah, so he's a free agent. He should be higher.
Dwayne Brown also free agent, right? Or did they sign him for 2 years?
Yeah, I think Dwayne Brown is still around, but he's older. So right tackle's a question, right? Max Mitchell is slated as the starter right now.
I think you also need to figure out what you want to do with Elijah Vera Tucker. So I think he's shown he can actually play 4 out of the 5 positions on that offensive line probably quite well, and you just sort of need to figure out where you want to put him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. But I think this makes sense for the Jets. You could try to make splashes in other places, but they're that team, right? That's kind of like built a good enough roster that there's not this glaring need that needs to be fit here. And that you can get a tackle that's either going to be an immediate starter or just a 2-year play here with Becton leaving.
And obviously we assume they will find a quarterback in the veteran market somewhere, whether it's trade or free agency or whatever.
New England Patriots going Joey Porter Jr., who's a cornerback for Penn State, not an edge rusher. I really like this pick. Here's your first corner off the board, and there'll be a little run here. I like this pick for New England, the way they like to play defense, get a long corner who's a nuisance at the catch point.
Yeah, he's a classic Patriots cornerback, only they don't necessarily play that way anymore.
They still probably want to.
Yeah, I don't know. That's this kind of pick would, I think, lean one way or the other in that question. Like, do they actually want to play that type of defense? Because it's not like Bill Belichick has always gone the way the wind is blowing when it comes to scheme in the NFL. Like, he tends to zig when everybody else is zagging. But the league is heading in the opposite direction to this type of corner. They are playing less press man coverage, more zone stuff. So do the Patriots actually want to play the type of defense that they played for the last half a decade, or do they want to go to more of a conventional system relative to everybody else?
I've watched a little bit of Porter. I do think he does play better as press. A little bit more questionable from a zone standpoint, not to oversimplify. So I don't hate that, though, as a pick. I think at their core, New England likes to mix it up, do both, and I think they want to play more man if they've got the corners to do it. And I think Joey Porter would help that. Mm-hmm. Green Bay Packers at 15 going Michael Mayer, tight end from Notre Dame.
Like it.
I like it a lot as well. For Jordan Love. Jordan Love, get him a nice tight end here.
For Jordan Love.
If Aaron Rodgers was the QB with the Packers, and I know that rookie tight ends aren't always the most immediate impact here or anything. Christian Watson as the deep threat, Mayer work in the middle of the field, figure out who the possession guy is, if it's Dobbs or someone else.
No, I mean, if it was Rodgers, they'd immediately change the pick to a cornerback just to troll him.
Oh, they would probably, yeah. They'd go defense,
right,
for sure. So Michael Mayer, a nice weapon for Jordan Love, potentially, here in Green Bay.
Yeah.
We're going to have all this drama, and then Rodgers going back,
I think their young wide receivers, they took some time to get going, but I think they showed enough over the course of their rookie year that you would be reasonably confident in them going forward. Robert Tonyan, though, at tight end, just ain't it. They need to upgrade there. And also, needless to say, the 27-year veteran Mercedes Lewis is probably not going to be the guy either.
A couple more corners off the board here. Number 16, Washington Commanders. They go Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois. And then the Steelers go cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon. So as we've said, none of these guys, we'll see what happens by draft time. I don't think any of these guys are seen as top 10 picks. We would value corners higher than the NFL, maybe pick them higher, but this is I think these are good picks for both teams.
We'll throw Detroit in there as well. We have a
three in a row, sorry.
Three-corner run. Washington go Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. Pittsburgh go Christian Gonzalez from Oregon. And Detroit at 18 goes Keely Ringo from Georgia. All three, I think, make sense in terms of teams that need corners, like need to make additions at this spot. The only question is which corner goes for which team.
Yeah, so they all have their own questions. Witherspoon was a one-year breakout, but, I don't think there's any corner who has more fun tape than Devin Witherspoon. Just flies around like an absolute missile.
Hits people hard.
Most improved player in the nation maybe this past year. 92 PFF grade, 92.5 coverage grade. My favorite play of the year was him breaking up a swing pass from outside corner, read it, and absolutely demolished the running back. So Witherspoon's a fun player that I think could end up in the top 10 when people at the end of the day. Christian Gonzalez has the 6'2" size, the length to play man. He makes things very difficult in one-on-one coverage down the field. And then Keely Ringo, who probably had his better seasons prior to 2022, he gave up some explosives this year. I've seen him fall. I forget where he is on our big board right now, but I think he's more in the second-round range. I think a lot of people have soured on Ringo as a first-round prospect and maybe have him more in the second. But still a good player, just didn't have as good of a season this year as people expected.
Yeah, the corner group this year is very strange. I think there's going to be a lot of divergent opinions. There's going to be a lot of guesswork involved in this group because there are a lot of weird factors like, had his best year a year ago or has 1 year of tape or blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of – it's going to be a very difficult group, I think, to unpick this season.
So that's 4 out of 5 picks in a row that are corners. There's another one coming up in a couple picks. We'll get to that in a second. The Tampa Bay Bucks are on the clock at 19. They go Lucas Van Ness, the power rusher from Iowa, edge/interior player, but more of an edge power type of player out of Iowa that's been very good. Hasn't played a ton of football, but Bucks, I think one of the biggest questions of this offseason is where do they go as an organization? Do they just start from scratch? Do they completely rebuild? I keep bringing up Mike Evans as a trade candidate. Other people have as well, but they poo-poo that as well because they've got all the Tom Brady dead money. You'd have a lot more dead money from Mike Evans, but do you just suck it up and go all the dead money this year if you're the Bucks?
This would give them a really fun group of defensive linemen, actually, when you think about what they have. Obviously, Shaquille Barrett's coming back from a torn Achilles. Who knows what he's going to play like at that point, given his age and the injury that he's coming back off. That's just to sort of park him to the side for a moment. But just the players that they would have, Vita Vea, obviously in the interior, is just this singular freak from a size, strength, potential ability. You've got Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who started to show a little bit towards the end of last year, is that pure speed, explosion type of pass rusher. You've got Lucas Van Ness presumably being added to the other side and try and add that. You've got, who did they draft last year? His name is
Logan Hall.
Logan Hall, that's it. So it's
early
an
second,
interior, edgy hybrid type of guy. Like, that's an intriguing group of defensive linemen that don't necessarily, I'm not sure any of them fit conventionally into a normal position bucket, but all of them together gives them quite an array and diversity of defensive linemen.
And a few of those picks, even though it was like, hey, we're going to make one last run with Tom Brady over the last couple of years, a few of those picks were more developmental type of prospects where they're all going to have to step up right now. They'll also have a potential hole at corner with Jamel Dean hitting free agency, so cornerback could be in the mix for the Bucs here in the first round as well. Seattle Seahawks up on the clock again. Remember, they took Tyree Wilson at 5. They're going Brian Branch, the safety out of Alabama. I think the stat you're going to hear over and over again was his tackling. Only had a handful of missed tackles in college. Good, dependable player. And if he's a pure safety, we're talking about Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs already in the secondary, but you're adding depth there. And then, the next piece as those guys move on in the coming years.
Yeah, this is quite a test of how much, sometimes there's a debate as to position value or area of need rather versus just best player available, right? And then there's generally a thought that, okay, even if you don't need a guy this year, you can draft a guy with the idea that next year he becomes a starter or moves on. The question is, how many years into the future can that be true before it's just not smart, and you're just simply drafting a backup in the first round, and that probably isn't a great idea. Seattle is complicated. So Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs are in theory the starting safeties. They're both under contract for some time to come still. With Jamal Adams, there's also the idea of they traded so much to get him. You have to assume they're going to be quite reluctant to just get rid of him at any point. Also, Ryan Neal last year ends up being a starter for the majority of the year because Jamal Adams goes down, and Ryan Neal had like an all-pro caliber season. So you already have a really good backup, even if you need the contingency of that. So do you bring another guy in to potentially be 3 or 4 in your group of safeties, even in this world of nickel, big nickel, sub packages where you can get more safeties on the field? I don't know. It just feels like a reach in terms of anything he can do to actually justify that with playing time.
It's not. I don't know if it's a reach for the player, but
No.
I see what you're saying. From
from them actually being
able.
able to get him on the field enough to make use of it, it feels like a stretch.
Jamal Adams has cap hits of 24 and 25 million starting in 2024. So I think it is like a year in advance type of move. Branch can also line up over the slot. He does have some versatility. I'm interested in Seattle maybe going the playmaker route here. There's other tight ends on the board. This is where receiver might see a little bit of a run here in the 20s into the 40s because, again, there's not the elite receiver, but there's which flavor do you like type of receivers. Having some complementary options for DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett could make sense here.
And this is also
Seattle.
a team that didn't fix their defensive line with one pick. Like I would like to see them hammering that defensive line this draft.
21, the Chargers go Cam Smith, the cornerback out of South Carolina. This is an interesting one. They just invested in J.C. Jackson last year. Do you continue down that road? Is this the we got to beat Patrick Mahomes, get as many corners as possible? Chargers have tried that before. Hasn't necessarily worked. I'm not saying don't do it, but I like the strategy of throwing a whole lot at the cornerback position.
But also remember how the J.C. Jackson thing went this year, which was like unmitigated disaster right up until the point he got injured where it looked like they finally figured out, oh, you know what, let's just play more man coverage with J.C. Jackson. That's what he's really good at. And then almost as soon as they discovered that, bam, knee injury, out for the year. So what do you take from that? Like, do you go, okay, actually we figured out how he's really good in this defense. We've got it. Took us a few games that it shouldn't have, but now we know. Or do you say, I mean, Jackson just isn't a good fit for this defense anymore. Like, what we signed up for, he doesn't bring to the table, which we discovered in the first few games. And now we're kind of stuck with this guy that doesn't really fit in this defense. And if he does play, we have to change the defense to suit him alone. And if we can get an alternative to that, that would be great.
All right, here's where it gets interesting, Sam. Bijan Robinson is off the board to the Baltimore Ravens.
To the Ravens.
At 22.
Wow.
Followed up by the Vikings taking wide receiver Jordan Addison out of USC at 23, and the Jaguars taking wide receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba out of Ohio State at number 24. So Bijan to the Ravens.
Yes. Bijan Robinson, running back from Texas, going to the Baltimore Ravens is one of the most fascinating places you could put him in this draft. This is the guy that we've been talking about as maybe the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson, or Saquon Barkley is the only other guy in that conversation, I guess. He's probably the best running back we've seen in college football since we've been grading. To put him on a team like the Ravens, where they're one of those sides capable of manufacturing rushing ability from anybody, right? But another one of those teams where they go after running backs better than you think they should because of what they're able to manufacture. Like, they went and got J.K. Dobbins, having already had this run of guys that can plug in and get 6 yards per carry, because they think, well, okay, if we can get 6 yards per carry out of these guys that aren't great, what can happen if we get a great running back?
Well, I think realistically they were getting 5 yards per carry.
Okay,
right?
and then went to 6 with J.K.
Right.
Dobbins.
They're out of Gus Edwards.
Right.
And then it was like, well, if you get a guy that's creative at the second level and can, take it to the house or whatever, you can legitimately average 6 yards per carry in this offense. Now, the Ravens have had years where their rushing attack was, like a top 7 passing attack or a top 6 passing attack, right? So as much as we diminish the value of the run game or the running back over here, in an extreme case with the Ravens, do you double down on that? And does Bijan, because I was saying when Derrick Henry was a free agent, like, what if Derrick Henry went to the Ravens? Is he one of those few guys that would make sense because he is going to legitimately punish defenders while Lamar Jackson's hitting you with speed and agility and everything, and it's just like, go ahead, try to defend this.
I mean, number one, I just want to see it. So I'm all on board. Yeah. I think this is outstanding. Number two, it is worth remembering that this is not the Greg Roman offense anymore, and we don't really know what this looks like yet. So you would assume that new offensive coordinator Todd McShay is going to make some changes. On the other hand, how many changes can you make, because this offense is extreme on the scale of different to the rest of the NFL. It's this skunkworks offense that they built around Lamar Jackson in the basement during the first year he was there. And it's evolved a little bit since then, but generally speaking, that's what we're dealing with. So if you're a new offensive coordinator tasked with coming in and improving, what do you do? Do you go, okay, we're going to junk this and we're going to run something much more conventional relative to the NFL, and we're going to see if Lamar Jackson can play like that? Or do you say, no, this works, we're going to stick with what's good, and we're going to make some tweaks here or there?
The place where people like to put running backs, and we'll see this later on here, Buffalo. Everybody wants to put a running back in Buffalo. To me, that's when it starts to get really iffy from like a team building standpoint. First off, I don't think the Bills are going to do it. Jahmyr Gibbs goes at 27 here. And Gibbs is awesome. Oh, man. Looks like Alvin Kamara sometimes. I mean, the Bills were hot on Kamara back a few years ago. I just don't know. That's when like a team that is so good at throwing the ball, so good at spreading the ball around and all that stuff, they will continue to manufacture running back production. The Ravens manufacture running back production, but they're going to get this volume, right? Like if Bijan's your guy, he's going to probably get his 20 carries a game, and you're not saying that's justifying it, but you're just slotting him into a system that already plays like that, presumably, right? I don't know. It feels like it's a little bit more justifiable. The interesting discussion, though, is if you take Bijan over, this is maybe the Rick Spielman discussion here from Friday. Jordan Addison, who's probably a second-tier wide receiver prospect, but a speed threat, he goes at 23. If you're the Ravens, which player makes a bigger impact for your team? Is it Bijan Robinson, the running back, or is it Jordan Addison, the receiver, who can maybe be that guy finally as a complementary deep threat to Rashad Bateman, or at least just another weapon on the outside with Mark Andrews patrolling the middle of the field.
Yeah, and it would also depend what the Ravens have done, in free agency or whatever. Like
Sure.
if they haven't addressed wide receiver at this point and they pass up on the receivers in the draft to take Bijan Robinson, that feels like a very, very difficult sell. I'd still love to see it because Bijan Robinson in that offense just feels like fun, but I think it would be pretty hard to defend if they haven't really addressed wide receiver and they pass up on every receiver in this draft except for Quentin Johnson.
Who do you think has a bigger impact then?
For the Ravens,
Jordan Addison or Bijan Robinson?
the receiver, any of them.
Yeah. And so that goes to this whole Bijan is a blue chip player, but I think when you're trying to maximize offensive production, it's easier to get running back production than it is receiver production.
Even in the Greg Roman offense, I think wide receiver would make a bigger difference. And you have to assume that any change that Monken makes will move it more in that direction.
I like this Addison pick for the Vikings, though.
Love it.
I like it a lot. Adam Thielen gets older, and just keep the pressure on opposing defenses. And this has to be the Vikings' focus this offseason, right? Like those games where Justin Jefferson is taken away with 2 or 3 guys. Let's build the other options.
Thielen's deep into his 30s at this point. He used to be a great complementary piece where if you slept on the number one, whether it was Stephon Diggs or Justin Jefferson, if you slept on that guy, Adam Thielen could pop off and have a big game. I don't think he's really capable of doing that anymore. It's like KJ Osborne is having those games now. So Thielen might be able to make a great catch every now and again or still, pick up some production. But yeah, if you could bring in a Jordan Addison, who I think is the best wide receiver in this draft class, he's just good at everything. And I think he is position flexible. You can play him outside. You can play him inside. He's good at everything. Like bringing him in to replace Thielen long term, I think is a fantastic move.
And then the Jags going Jackson Smith and Jigba, the wide receiver out of Ohio State at 24. I don't know. I'm torn on this one because Smith and Jigba spent most of his time in the slot. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean he can't work outside, but he spends most of his time in the slot. I don't think he's going to have great speed if he runs. Plays like a 4.5 type of guy. It also feels like the Jags, who do have some speed, they need a true X. Now, is that Calvin Ridley? I don't think that's Calvin Ridley. I think Calvin Ridley's an outside receiver. I don't think when he played true X receiver, didn't have the best results with Atlanta. I like the idea of just throwing more targets out there for Trevor Lawrence, but Smith and Jigba feels like another middle of the field target for the Jags when they could use a one-on-one dominator on the outside.
He's a very weird wide receiver to me. Everything about his game is unusual and unconventional and not normal. He's going to get talked about as just being the slot guy only. I actually think schematically and fundamentally, he has a skill set that works better as an X, as an outside guy against press coverage. I think he's better at that stuff than he is working the slot, actually. Weird for a guy that was as productive as he was in the slot, but I don't know that he has the best feel for it in the world. He might be a much better X receiver at the NFL level than he is playing inside. But even if he isn't, even if he is a Z or a slot guy, a guy that needs to be off the line of scrimmage and work space rather than against aggressive man coverage, when you start putting all those guys together, and if you assume Ridley gets unsuspended at the end of this year, Christian Kirk, Ridley, Smith and Jigba, like all of a sudden I think you're putting together a composite that works even if you don't have the one alpha Julio Jones X-type receiver. So I think it makes sense.
And in this offseason, that might have to be the play, right? If DeAndre Hopkins is the most common name out there on the market, if the Jags don't land someone like Nuke Hopkins, who, by the way, would be awesome with that cast, right? Then maybe just focus on tight end after that. But if you can't land a Nuke Hopkins, and the Mike Evans thing is just in my head and not in reality, there's not a whole lot of those receivers available. Do you attack it with the composite of different types? So I'm all for just adding receivers and pass catchers and playmakers and all that stuff. Just interesting to see where Smith and Jigba might fit in here.
I don't. If you miss miss their final year due to injury, whatever, it happens. It's very unusual for a guy to miss basically an entire year with a hamstring injury, which is a bit
Yeah,
bizarre.
I don't know what was actually happening there, but anytime hamstrings are involved, I think even at a young age, that's a little iffy. Those tend to pop up, and they become those 4 to 6 week nagging injuries.
Yeah, well, he was nagged the entire year.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
I know. So, I don't know. I'm no doctor. You're closer to doctors than I am.
Well, as somebody that had a hamstring injury that I kept re-aggravating because it was whilst I was coaching. So, you know, you're refereeing little kids and you got to move. And as soon as you move, it's like the hamstring goes again. It's like, God damn it.
You can relate.
Yeah. So somebody that had a hamstring injury for a vast period of time, longer than it should have existed, I get it, you know? And also, again, you play tag rugby. You strap it up, right? You're like, I'll just go 80%. It's very difficult to not sprint when you have to go 80%. So I get it. I understand how you can keep pulling the hamstring time after time. But that's presumably where the medical staff has to step in and be like, let me save you from you. Don't strap your hamstring up and try and run on it anyway, because you will hurt it again. You know?
You're comparing your coaching / tag rugby hamstring injury
Yes.
to what an elite athlete like Jackson Smith and Jigba was dealing with last year at Ohio State.
100%.
Yeah, that's why people tune in here.
I mean, I don't think you appreciate the elite level of speed I had back then.
Well, that's also why
Now,
you are a top 5
I didn't
NFL
have,
Irish
I
analyst.
certainly didn't have the elite level of medical support staff that he has available to him, or indeed rehab facility. But,
They literally did say tape it up and go.
well,
It's
they didn't,
tag rugby.
They didn't even say that. I decided that because I'm an idiot.
Yeah. So, something to think about if the Jags are going to play tag rugby next year. Giants at 25. They're going receiver Zay Flowers out of Boston College.
Yeah.
I like this.
A lot of guys love Zay Flowers.
Speed,
Steve
elusiveness.
Smith was raving about him.
Yeah.
Thinks he's amazing.
Why did he? I don't know. No disrespect to the Shrine Bowl, but why wasn't Zay going to the Senior Bowl? Went to the Shrine Bowl.
Why don't you ask Jim Nagy?
Or differently phrased, Eric Galko and the Shrine Bowl are making plays. Making plays, getting some first rounders in there, like Zay Flowers. That's what the Shrine Bowl's trying to do. Continue to up their profile, and they're doing a great job. They brought in some excellent players this year. So Zay Flowers, I like this fit. Get some weapons in there.
Yeah.
Do it. Draft all the receivers.
Particularly given the ones that have already gone off the board, I think that's a good deal for New York.
Flowers will be an interesting one for me because the production's not necessarily there, but
But everyone loves him. He's that guy where everyone puts on the tape and goes, this guy's
which is
amazing.
fine. I love him on tape too. My the model doesn't love him from a production standpoint. I think that's quarterback driven over there.
Yeah.
But Zay Flowers, I love him on tape as well. I think
Who's
he's
the last
fantastic.
one of those guys where like just everybody loved that dude, particularly at wide receiver?
Quentin Nelson.
There's usually wide receiver. There's usually one of those, you know, every couple of years where everybody's like, this guy is amazing, even though we know he's going to go like mid tier given his position. There's usually a wide receiver that every now and again everyone comes along and goes, that guy's great.
AJ Brown. Why did
I
anybody
could
not
have
like AJ Brown?
Right.
Number 26 overall, Dallas Cowboys going Osiris Torrance, the guard out of Florida. 1 year stop at Florida. Consensus top guard. Cowboys going that route. Does that make sense there? Shore up the offensive line even further. Last year they basically drafted a guard as well, Tyler Smith.
Right. Well, they did. They drafted a guy that they were expecting to play guard all season, and then he didn't because they needed tackles because everyone got hurt. So Terrence Steele, presumably coming back off his injury. Tyron Smith is still going to be back again, but how much can you rely on Tyron Smith staying healthy at left tackle? And then Tyler Smith, who presumably starts a guard until one of those guys gets hurt. They need him at tackle. I guess it's contingency, and maybe you can. I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on this one.
I think this is. I don't know where Todd's going with this one. He's talking about Connor McGovern's contract expiring. They still have Zach Martin and Tyler Smith. I don't know if there's an assumption that Tyler Smith moves to left tackle sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Maybe the Cowboys move on.
I mean, maybe
Tyron Smith.
Maybe his performance at left tackle as opposed to guard in his first year changed some projections as to what they think he's going to be going forward. Like, we drafted this guy, he's going to be our starting guard. We're set at tackle, and we think he's maybe got some problems at tackle anyway, given his college tape, how raw he was, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, you're like, actually, he's already a pretty good starting tackle. Maybe we can go in a different direction with this.
Yeah, so I don't love that pick for the Cowboys overall. I think they need to get back to the playmaker market. Did I see Micah Parsons also said, I don't know why we made the Amari Cooper trade? Do reporters just call up Micah Parsons knowing he's going to say something?
I would at this point.
Yeah. Hey, Micah, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of Jerry Jones? Just to ask him about everything because he'll give you an opinion. And they'll have some sort of quote coming out of that. I think Dallas is going to be another playmaker-driven offseason. Todd does mention that maybe they'll be enticed by Bijan Robinson if he was available. And that would be interesting.
I think they'd be interested in wide receiver, but we just had a run on them. I think this particular draft board kind of screws them in that regard, but I'm still not 100% sure I get the Torrance pick.
Here's the common one. Buffalo Bills taking Jahmyr Gibbs, running back out of Alabama.
Yeah, I don't really get it.
It's another team where I think they're going to assess their AAR. This offseason is going to be receiver opposite Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis is a better 3 than a 2, so we have to attack that, whether it's in free agency or via trade.
And again, you just had a run of them, so that's problematic. But I just, even specifically this running back, I don't quite understand why it makes sense for them.
Why not get? I mean, Gibbs is outstanding.
Well, he's dynamic,
catching the ball, open field.
So his selling point primarily is the run after the catch, receiving element, which is exactly why you just drafted James Cook, who started to look pretty good.
I understand.
If this was a year ago, I would understand it a lot more because that's exactly the sales pitch that was used for James Cook is, hey, we've got this backfield that we kind of like anyway, but what we really want to do is add run after the catch skills for Josh Allen. Give him some free plays where we just dump it off to the running back and James Cook makes some play after the catch, just improves production. That was literally exactly the sales pitch they used all the way along, and it made sense. But you drafted that guy, and he looked fine doing that, and you traded for Naheem Hines during the season, so you sort of doubled up on that spot. You need it less now than you needed it a year ago. So I don't get it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are going to put running back in Buffalo. I don't think they'll go running back.
Same.
So I love Gibbs, though. Love Gibbs as a player. I love this pick for the Bengals, too. Dalton Kincaid, the tight end for Cincinnati. I saw somebody earlier during the season or something mock Michael Mayer to the Bengals when they were estimated to pick at 22 or whatever it was. I think any of those, Luke Musgrave's the other tight end. There's 3 tight ends discussed at least in the first round mix here. I like any pass catching tight end to the Bengals. Kincaid's more of your H-back body, 240 pounds, really effective receiver. And same thing, right? Bengals are going to lose Joe Mixon, presumably, potential cut candidate. Don't go crazy at the running back position. You don't have to draft one here. You don't have to go crazy in free agency. Get a guy that's good enough at that position. It's Joe Burrow's team, and we have to continue to take pressure off the outside receivers. So Kincaid work in the middle of the field, being an H-back type, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it does as well. Given the amount of money that they're presumably about to have to commit to 3 guys on that offense, the 2 pass catchers and the passer, anytime they can get really cheap at another important receiving or skill position player, I think it's a move they should try and make. Offensive line is definitely on the table as well, given what happened this year. I will say, though, I've been using Jonah Williams a lot as a sort of, hey, the one guy you thought was good and wasn't because he gave up 12 sacks. Remember, I forgot that he dislocated his kneecap in like week 4 or something and then was out a very short period of time and came back and wasn't good from that period on. Now, it wasn't good over the first 4 weeks either, so maybe it's coincidental. But it did feel like that was an injury that was going to keep you out for quite a while. Your kneecap just falls off, and then all of a sudden he's back in the lineup giving up sacks left and right. So maybe the baseline for Jonah Williams is, in fact, a lot more like his first couple of years than it was last year, in which case he probably goes back to being, we can work with that. Now, you're going to have to pay him at some point anyway, so it doesn't necessarily prevent you drafting contingency at left tackle, but it might not be as bad as it looked last year, is my point.
The guy that I'm going to push at this range, now that you're talking tackle, it will be interesting if they're able to lock up Jonah Williams, who, let's say he's an average plus tackle, right? What is that worth? That's $17 million, $16 to $18 million. If he might think he's worth 20. You can't do that
right
with Burrow, Higgins, and Chase.
Yeah.
DeJuan Jones, the monster out of Ohio State, who's probably going to play right tackle. I wouldn't hate him at this point for multiple teams that just might have a right tackle need. So that would be interesting, too, to see where the Bengals go there. The Saints at number 29 via the Denver Broncos, via the Miami Dolphins, via the San Francisco 49ers. This pick has changed hands. Saints back in the first round. They go Keon White, the edge out of Georgia Tech, more of a power edge, fits their mold. We'll see what they end up doing with Marcus Davenport. He's either a replacement or a complement, and another guy that they add with Cameron Jordan there.
Your guy, big model guy.
Yeah, there's a few guys that the model really liked who were not discussed in the first round, who are now all of a sudden first rounders. Keon White is one of them. Dalton Kincaid, who just went off the board at tight end for Utah. The model is fond.
Steve's draft model out in front of the consensus.
Yes, this could be good. So agents have we've talked to some high-end agencies, and what they're really looking for is to know who the first rounders are going to be a year in advance, because then they start recruiting. They want to make sure that they invest their time
in the right people.
I do need to start looking at that a year ahead. Are we able to better predict first rounders than, say, the early mock drafts and all that stuff? Because this could be good. This could be good for the model here. Keon White going in the first round to the Saints.
Anything we can do to publicize the model. That's the important thing.
Antoine Harrison, the offensive tackle for Oklahoma, goes to the Eagles at number 30. So this is just the pattern, right? Draft defensive lineman, draft offensive lineman, draft him a year in advance before before really Lane Johnson as he gets older.
Yeah.
And just, add security there.
Don't love this one. I understand contingency and drafting for the future, et cetera, but they've future-proofed most of that offensive line already. Remember, a year ago, they drafted Jason Kelsey's eventual successor. I don't really see them going offensive tackle. I would definitely prefer them to try and find some defensive back cover before this.
There's other cornerback depth here. We have a bunch of guys in the top 60 who really in the top 50 who all could fit in here. Now here's the guy that I'm not going to love. The number 31 overall pick going to the Kansas City Chiefs. There's only 31 first rounders this year.
Yep.
But Jalen Duncan, the tackle from Maryland, none of the data points like Duncan. Model, which is production based. Any of our production got absolutely whooped against Penn State last year. He is one of those guys who's looks the part at left tackle, but has never played the part. And him going in the first round feels like a risky proposition.
Which is kind of how Renner has described him as well, as looks like the other offensive tackles, hasn't necessarily played that way yet, which is certainly problematic. I agree that this is an area the Chiefs should definitely look to. Whether or not they bring back Orlando Brown, Andrew Wiley at right tackle is generally an issue, although he had a good Super Bowl, so kudos to him. But yeah, you presumably want the giant mammoth mountain man,
DeJuan Jones.
Yeah, just because you can relate as a wingspan man. You presumably have some sort of 9-foot wingspan.
Let's get him at the combine and try to have a little wingspan contest.
Wingspan off.
Yeah.
And then the hands as well you got to do, just because anytime
so
you're there.
Wingspan though, right? You're going length to length. So your body's a part of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose that part. Don't you think?
Presumably against him, yes.
Against him,
most people, no.
There are some rumors that the Rams are going to move on from Jalen Ramsey or try to trade Jalen Ramsey, right? Maybe reset the strategy, add more depth, get some draft picks back and all that. Are the Chiefs feel like this prime candidate to, they have the worst first round pick at 31, but don't they feel like this team where it's let's really lean into it, make this into the full dynasty, make an aggressive move here at corner, go get Jalen Ramsey.
Their entire secondary is kind of on peanuts at the moment. That's actually one of the strengths of the team, is that they're not investing anything in that group.
No, I know.
Things stand. And by the way, they're playing pretty well.
They did a great job with that.
They relied heavily on rookies and first contract guys, and they're all doing a good job.
They're in such a position of strength. They have 12 draft picks in Kansas City.
Yeah.
So they could throw a ton of draft picks, though, at one player. And it's as much as it's hey, we had Jalen Watson, 7th rounder, and we had Joshua Williams, undrafted free agent. Really good stories and all that stuff. But we could have Jalen Ramsey,
Yeah, like to me though, their entire strategy when it comes to investing money elsewhere beyond the Patrick Mahomes deal is simply don't screw anything up. You don't even need to invest the money tremendously wisely. Just don't swing and a miss in a huge way, because that kills everything. And that, I mean, I'm not saying Jalen Ramsey would be a swing and a miss, because obviously he's been a very good player in multiple different roles in multiple different teams now. But it just feels like there's a team out there that doesn't want to go and invest in a big spot in one position and then have that become a problem. I don't really see them being interested in that.
Yeah. Well, I'll push that narrative as well.
Come here, I've got a quote for you.
Yeah.
I've been trying to find this for ages, since back when we were talking quarterbacks and you being Mr. Touchy-Feely and, what's the problem with just adding two competing quarterbacks to the same room? If they can't deal with that, they're not the guy anyway, right? There was an amazing article by Wright Thompson on ESPN about Joe Montana, where he goes and visits him, spends plenty of time. It's a monster. It's like a book. But the funny thing was a lot in it about like the mentality of these guys who were all crazy, right? And Steve Young had a bit in it saying, if you get like 10 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in a room, it's insane. They all sort of look around being like, I mean, are we supposed to just race now? Like, what do we do? Like, all of them think they're the alpha, right? But they're obviously they're not. One of them maybe. And there was a big thing about how it kind of eats away at Montana that Brady has 7 Super Bowls, because Brady got to play in this era where you're not allowed to touch the quarterback, and Joe Montana was pummeled face first into the turf every time he faced the Giants or whatever, right? So there's
You
this.
could hear that in Montana's interviews a little bit.
Yeah. And there was a bit, they were sort of like, everyone wants to write more in the book, like the book of their greatness and the records and all this kind of stuff, but you don't get to. At some point, the thing closes for you, right? Yeah. And they were sort of saying, well, Montana must have felt that 4 Super Bowls in, the legacy he had, that like he'd written enough. And then along comes Brady a few years later, and it's like, God damn it, it wasn't even close. 3 more. Anyway, so there was this whole thing about how the Joe Montana Steve Young dynamic worked, and there was this quote about how it's more than just a dude trying to take your job. And so, quote, now he understands. He wasn't trying to take Joe Montana's job. He was trying to kill him, to take away the air in his lungs and the ground beneath his feet, to burn down his home and bury the ashes. He took years away and left blank pages where more Montana legend might have been inscribed. That's what it is inside these guys' heads. So when you just go, just draft another quarterback, just add another guy to the room. In their mind, this is what's happening. Like, you're bringing in a guy to mount a very assault on that dude's soul during that year. That's going to screw him up. Like, there's no 2 ways about it. That's not a good thing.
So when the Eagles draft Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round.
Yeah, in Carson Wentz's brain, like, they've just torched his compound with all his, ducks and whatever hanging on the wall.
Carson Wentz is saying, you just ripped a couple chapters of my legend out of my career.
You have just laid siege to my hunting compound with my, moose on the wall and the ducks hanging to be dried. That's what you've done. You've just set a picket around this thing and laid siege to the building.
Now, if the goal is to win championships and maximize performance, doesn't matter.
Yes. Because your quarterback feeling like that is not good.
They literally won 2 championships while Steve Young was the backup.
Yes.
Did they leave some on the table because Steve Young was on the backup? The backup?
I'm going to go ahead and suggest that Joe Montana's ability to channel that into, productive rage is probably not normal.
Right. Which is why you can make that move and it's okay. And if they can't turn it into productive rage, you trade Carson Wentz and you have a better option. That's the whole point. You made my point.
No.
You absolutely made my point.
No, your point is simply, if you have Joe Montana, it's cool. If you don't, forget it.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers too. He channeled darkness into 2 MVPs. He channeled Jordan Love into 2 MVPs. It didn't work for the championship.
Yeah.
But you're making my point here, Sam.
No.
Either you're able to do better. The Patriots drafted Jimmy Garoppolo. They win 3 more championships. 3 more championships after Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy G is a 2-time Super Bowl champion because Bill Belichick drafted him as Brady's replacement, which pushed Brady over the edge of like, nope, that's it.
I don't
Never.
think your line can be, if we have one of the 5 greatest and most demented quarterbacks of all time, it's okay. Anything else, it's a disaster.
Where's it a disaster? The Eagles did it, and they ended up with a better quarterback. It answered the problem for them. Who's our quarterback? Well, it's not Carson Wentz. He can't handle having Jalen Hurts sitting next to him in the QB room. Guess what? Now we have Jalen Hurts, who's better and cheaper, and we almost won a Super Bowl because of it. It absolutely worked.
The problem is turning any quarterback who isn't one of the 5 greatest quarterbacks of all time into a gibbering mental case, feeling like the world is against them.
You're also you can't play both sides here. You can't say Joe Montana's an outlier, he's crazy, and then project his mentality on everyone else.
Yeah, I think you can.
You can't.
It's
his mentality.
No, because this article also talks about how like all of these quarterbacks feel like this.
All the great ones. You said you can't just focus on the great ones. So let's not focus on the great ones.
You've also got Carson Wentz. Like this has happened to many other quarterbacks.
Carson Wentz is not a great one.
That's what I'm saying.
He was probably just offended and he played worse.
I think all of these guys feel the same way when a new quarterback is brought in to take their job. And only 1 or 2 of them does that channel its way into positive production.
I'm not saying I would not care for the person as a general manager, that I would not care for their family and their livelihood and all that stuff. What I'm saying is if you are judging purely by outcomes, you have proven my point.
I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, because if you have a great quarterback and you piss them off with an understudy, you get better results out of the great ones. If you bring competition in for a less than great one, you start to sift through things and you probably move on quicker than you would have. The Eagles aren't attached to Carson. If they were attached to Carson Wentz for the last 2 years, they're not back in the Super Bowl.
Well, no, because Carson Wentz isn't good.
Right. And they got to go to the Super Bowl because they didn't care about his feelings. They drafted a guy in the second round. They didn't say, oh, no, we can't draft a quarterback and offend him. They drafted a guy in the second round who proved to be better, cheaper, and did bring them 3 points away from a championship.
Yeah.
That's a win for the Eagles. That's a good move for the Eagles, that they brought in competition for the guy who couldn't handle the competition. That was good for the Eagles organization.
They also assembled the best roster in the NFL, which is
in part
helpful.
Because they had Jalen Hurts on a rookie contract and could make those moves.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Your Honor.
I'm not sure the solution.
We have a 3-minute. We have a meeting in 3 minutes. I rest my case.
I'm not sure the solution to every NFL team is simply blow up your quarterback position, find a good starter on no money, and then assemble the best roster in the NFL. That's how we're going to do this.
I rest my case.
The GM comes in and says, all right, Mr. Owner, how I'm going to build this team is I'm going to get rid of your quarterback. I'm going to find a good young quarterback on a rookie deal and a cheap rookie deal because he was not a first-round pick.
Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes when they had Alex Smith.
Then I'm going to build the best roster in the NFL, and that's how we're going to win. All right, on you go.
Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes when they already had Alex Smith.
That's back to your thing of that's not a strategy. That's just luck. That's how it worked.
It's literally part of NFL strategy when you have a first contract quarterback that you could build around them better.
Right, but it's not like assembling the best roster in the NFL is not a game plan. That's not a blueprint.
Yeah, I get it. I'm saying Jalen Hurts has proven to be better than Carson Wentz. In addition to the flexibility that he's given you to build the rest of your team.
Yeah, but even with that, you needed to assemble the best roster in the NFL to get there, and you still
was Jalen Hurts a good draft pick in the second round, or was he a bad draft pick because maybe he offended your starting quarterback at the time?
I mean, he's a good draft pick because he worked out. From a process standpoint, I think that was less amazing than a lot of other people think it was.
Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes when they didn't need him, when they had Alex Smith. He's a good solid starter.
Kind of needed him.
Anyway, go check out the PFF app. Everything you need here during draft season, writing, of course, betting and fantasy when you get to it. But draft guides out as well, all part of PFF Plus. First run of the draft guide, we'll throw a couple of those out there. So go check out all that stuff right now. We're back again tomorrow. You're here tomorrow?
Yeah.
With Renner?
Sure.
Did you guys talk about it yet?
No.
Renner might be here tomorrow. PFF NFL podcast show. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow. You proved my point. Thank you, Sam. I win.